Let's give it a second here. It's just starting the live stream. Take this one right now. Great. So hello and welcome to the Philip J. Currie Dinosaurs Museum's virtual speaker series for the month of March. We are very, very happy to welcome Dr. Steve Brusatte, who will be giving us our lecture this morning. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end. So if you are watching on the YouTube stream, feel free to put your questions into the chat there and we'll address them as we go. So I'd just like to introduce our guest this morning. So Dr. Steve Brusatte is an American paleontologist who is a professor of paleontology and evolution at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. He's the author of international bestseller, The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs, and the new book, The Rise and Reign of the Mammals. The paleontology advisor on Jurassic World film franchise, Brusatte has been named more than 50 new species, including the Tyrannosaur Pinocchio Rex and the Raptor Genelong, and several ancient mammals. His research and writing has been featured in Science, the New York Times, Scientific America, and many other publications. And so with that, I'd like to pass it over to Steve. I will mute and stop my video here. So you'd like to take it away?
Okay, thank you, Emily, for the very kind intro. Thanks, Jackson, for setting this up as well. And very happy to be talking to you guys. I should say good afternoon, almost evening from Scotland here. We're at 7 hours ahead of time, so thanks for making time to do this a bit earlier in the morning for you to make it work here. So, all right, I'm going to jump into it here. It looks like, Emily, I just need to have you enable the screen sharing for me, or Jackson, one of you. This looks like it's disabled for me.
Yeah, you should be good.
Okay, great. So here we go, and I think you guys should be seeing the slides here. Excellent. And I'm not quite sure how you. There we go. That's better there. Okay, excellent. Great. So thank you again for inviting me here. I'm going to talk to you about dinosaurs today, and I'm going to tell you the story of dinosaurs. I'm going to give you really a whirlwind tour of the whole evolution of dinosaurs from their origins to the modern day. And I'm going to do it very quickly, of course, in broad strokes, but I hope you will enjoy it. I certainly enjoy it. I love studying dinosaurs. I love being one of these privileged people who gets to dig up dinosaur bones for my job. And I grew up in the middle part of America. I've ended up far from home. I've been in Scotland for about 10 years now, but it's really amazing to teach and to work here at the University of Edinburgh, one of the grand old universities of Europe that goes back to the 1580s. It's really amazing. And this is the place where the science of modern geology got its start. So it's a neat thing to be here. It's also a great place to study fossils, as you will see a little bit later in the talk. So a few years ago, I wrote a book on dinosaurs, a popular science book called The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs, and I'm more or less going to give you the story I give in the book today, which is the story of dinosaurs, where they came from, how they became so successful, so dominant, so big, how some of them evolved feathers and wings and became birds, and then how the rest of them went extinct. And this is, well over 150 million years of evolutionary history. I'm going to do it in 50 minutes or so. So rather than waffle on, we will dive into it and go back to when the world looked like this. The age of the supercontinent, Pangea, when all of the land was gathered together. This is what the world was like about 250 million years ago. And it was a harsh place to live. There were big deserts across much of that supercontinent. And there were very violent storms and weather patterns there. But there, of course, were some plants and animals that were very well adapted to that world, including many distant ancestors and relatives of mammals. They were the ones that really had dominion on the Pangean world. But then that world was thrown into chaos when these enormous volcanoes started to erupt in what is now Russia. And those volcanoes are they were totally out of the scale of any volcanoes that humans have ever seen. Thankfully, these were basically giant fissures in the earth that opened up and just gushed out lava for hundreds of thousands, even millions of years. And that lava scorched a lot of the earth, but more importantly, the gases that came up with the lava as it burned through the crust, the carbon dioxide, the methane, they poisoned the atmosphere, they led to a runaway global warming, and that caused a mass extinction. And this was the biggest mass death in the history of Earth. Maybe up to 95% of species died out, but some did survive. And when I was a student, I was very, very interested in that story of the extinction, what lived and what died, and how a new world was forged afterwards in the next interval of time, which is the Triassic period. So I spent a lot of time in Poland looking for fossils, and maybe Poland doesn't strike you as the kind of place where you can find fossils. It doesn't look anything like the Badlands of Alberta, where it just, the Badlands of Alberta, they look like a place where you should find dinosaurs, right? You have lots of rock and you have lots of erosion, and it's rural and it's isolated. And of course, a lot of people do find dinosaurs in Alberta. But also you can find them in Poland, but in different places. And a lot of the rocks in Poland that we look for are in quarries where these mudstone layers are being mined to make clay for bricks and other industrial uses. And there's layer after layer of these mudstones. They span that mass extinction from the Permian into the Triassic. You can read those layers like the pages in a book, and those layers are full of fossils. And the fossils that are in these Polish rocks are not necessarily the big, beautiful skeletons that you might see on display at a museum. They're more humble fossils, and they are the fossils of what these animals left behind. Records of their behavior, footprints, handprints, tail marks, the marks they made as they were going about their everyday lives. And in rocks that were formed at most 1 million years or so after that terrible mass extinction, these tracks show up in the Polish record. There's a handprint and there's a footprint of this animal, and they're very small. You can see these things are just a few centimeters long. They'd be about the size of a cat's paw print. And we can do the Cinderella thing and try to match skeletons that we know from elsewhere to these tracks. And we can tell the Trackmaker looks something like this. I think a pretty funny looking, awkward looking little creature that walked on all fours, slender arms and legs, but an animal that was built for speed, an animal that was agile. And a small animal, again, just about the size of a house cat. This was a type of reptile, and it's a type of reptile we call a dinosauromorph, and that's just the fancy name for the immediate ancestors and cousins of dinosaurs. So what you're looking at here, the animal that made those trackways in the very early Triassic of Poland, was essentially the great-great-great-great-great-grandparent of T-Rex and Brontosaurus and all the other familiar dinosaurs. And I know it doesn't look much of anything like those dinosaurs that would come later, but of course, all great things must start somewhere. And that's what it was like with the dinosaurs. Now, the world that these first dinosaurs and their close relatives lived in was a world, of course, very different from today. It was still the supercontinent, but it was a world during the rest of the Triassic period for the next 50 million years or so where the dinosaurs really struggled to gain footing. The dinosaurs did spread around a bit, they did diversify, but most dinosaurs were quite small. And they were not the top predators. They were not at the top of the food chain. And we see a good record of this in Portugal, where we've also gone to collect fossils. We went to Portugal hoping we would find fossils of Triassic dinosaurs, because there's these great Triassic rocks. And we have yet to find any. And that's probably not because the dinosaurs weren't there. They probably were there, but they probably were just so rare that it's hard to find their fossil bones. But instead, we have found a graveyard, a bone bed of dozens and probably really hundreds of these things, these hideous giant amphibians, basically salamanders the size of cars. And these were the types of animals that ruled the rivers and the lakes in the Triassic period. If you were one of those small early dinosaurs, you would stay as far away from the water as possible. These things would be lurking there. But it wasn't any better on dry land, because during the Triassic period, on land, it was the age of crocodiles. Today, crocodiles, alligators, they're plenty scary. You don't want to run into one. And you always see these stories in the news of crazy people in Florida mostly doing stupid things, provoking the alligators. But really, alligators are not very important animals today, nor are any of the crocs. There's not that many species. They all live in the tropics or the subtropics. They're not a big part of our world, but in the Triassic period, there was a whole host of early crocodiles and their close relatives. Some were at the top of the food chain. Others were nearly the size of buses. Some had big spikes on their bodies. Some ate plants. Some lost their teeth and grew beaks, kind of like a turtle. Others had sails on their back. Some of them only walked on their hind legs. A huge diversity of these early crocodiles and their relatives. They ruled the land, and the dinosaurs during the Triassic really were bit characters, B-list actors in a croc and amphibian drama. But something changed. Of course something changed, because we know that eventually there would be T-Rexes and Brontosauruses and all these amazing dinosaurs. So what happened? Well, that world of the crocs and the big salamanders was ushered out by another moment of intense environmental change. And that is at the end of the Triassic period, about 200 million years ago, the supercontinent began to break apart. And of course it did. This is why we have separate continents today. Now today, what used to be that dividing line between South America and Africa, let's say, that's filled with the water of the Atlantic Ocean. Same thing, North America and Europe used to be connected. Now the Atlantic separates them. But before water rushed in to fill these gaps in the cracking supercontinent, first the Earth bled lava. Once again, it was a time of major volcanic eruptions. Once again, it was a time of intense global warming and a mass extinction. And this extinction, it hit the crocodiles and the giant salamanders really hard. They were some of the prominent victims. Not all of them died, but most of them did. The dinosaurs, on the other hand, they were the great success story. They were the survivors of that extinction. They sailed right on through, and it seems like they barely even noticed what happened. And I wish I could tell you why that was. It would make the story a whole lot more convincing, I know, but the fact is we don't know for sure. We don't know what it was about dinosaurs that allowed them to endure. Were they faster? Were they smarter? Did they have higher metabolisms? Were they just lucky? We don't know. I'm sure that a brilliant young scientist will figure it out. And I do think it's one of the biggest mysteries that remains about dinosaurs. But the fact is, we don't know the why, but we know the what. And what happened was that world of the Triassic was over. And in the next interval of time after that extinction, the Jurassic period, that is when dinosaurs really asserted their dominance. And this is when dinosaurs spread around the world and grew to giant sizes and diversified into all of the fantastic creatures that we know and love. The ones with long necks and horns on their head and plates on their backs and spikes on their tails and duckbills and so on. This sort of world that you see here, the classic world of dinosaurs, really only started in the Jurassic period, many tens of millions of years after the first dinosaurs evolved. And right now we are finding so many more dinosaur fossils that are telling this story of how dinosaurs took over the world. We are in a golden age, a true golden age of paleontology right now. More people are finding more dinosaurs than ever before. Somewhere around the world, I kid you not, a new species of dinosaur is being found on average about once every single week. So there's about 50 new species every year. And places like Alberta are where a lot of those dinosaurs are being found, but it's not just Canada and the US and Western Europe and the places that dinosaurs traditionally were found, and the places where the big universities and museums historically have been. What's really driving this today is that the field is diversified. There's more young people than ever before looking for dinosaurs, young women, young men from around the world, and particularly from giant growing countries like China and Argentina and Brazil and Mongolia and South Africa, so many places. And this is why so many new dinosaurs are being found. And there are so many new discoveries these days that we are even finding them right here in Scotland, believe it or not. But believe it, because we do have dinosaurs here. We didn't even know there were dinosaurs here until the 1980s. That's when the first dinosaur fossil, a single footprint, was found here on the Isle of Skye, this gorgeous island off the west coast of Scotland. And one of my favorite places. They film a lot of Hollywood movies here now because of just the stunning scenery, the cliffs, the moors. It is a enchanting place. It's like something out of a Tolkien novel. But what's great about the Isle of Skye is that a lot of these cliffs, especially in the north part of the island, are carved out of Jurassic Age rocks. Rocks full of fossils that help tell the story of dinosaurs taking over the world. Now, we do a lot of field work on the Isle of Skye. We go there pretty much every year with our students. It is a challenging place to work. The weather is always tough. It's raining all the time. It's cold. It's damp. It's windy. Almost all the fossils are found in rocks near the coast, so we can only work at low tide, but it's well worth it. And I take my students there, and I kid you not, my students always find the best fossils. I wish I could claim the best fossils for myself, but my students always find the best stuff. And the best example of that is, this is Amelia here in the middle. Amelia was a student a few years ago. We were out on the island looking for fossils, and she found on the coast here the skull of a pterosaur, a pterodactyl, one of the flying reptiles, sticking out of the rocks. And that skull led to a neck, which led to a body, which led to a largely complete skeleton, which is an incredible find made by one of our students. I'd say more about it, except that pterosaurs are not dinosaurs, often mistaken as dinosaurs, but because they're close cousins of dinosaurs, I don't want to get on too much of a tangent. But this is just really to heap praise where it's deserved on our students for finding the best fossils. Now, we take our students out, we train them in fieldwork techniques. This is Moji, who came from Nigeria to study with us on a master's course. We have a one-year master's course in paleontology in Edinburgh. Moji studied the fossil fish of the Isle of Skye, and here she is cutting out some fossils from the rock. The rock is very hard, so we can't use hammers and chisels like you're probably used to seeing in places like Alberta. And we don't use plaster jackets and that kind of thing. The rock is just too hard. So instead we have to cut the fossils out. If you're looking for little fish bones and teeth, you can use a little angle grinder like this. If you're looking for dinosaurs, you need bigger tools. And this is Doogie Ross, our dear friend who grew up on the Isle of Skye, who literally built his own museum to hold the fossils and other artifacts he was discovering. Here's Doogie cutting a bone out of the rock. Now, I could tell you lots of stories about Skye, but I want to just focus on one in particular that demonstrates why these fossils are important and how they fit into the bigger story. And this is a find that we made almost a decade ago now at the northern tip of the island. I'm taking this photograph. I'm literally standing in the shadow of the ruins of a 14th century castle. It doesn't get more Scottish than that. And you might see, look at that blue sky. I just told you the weather on the Isle of Skye is horrible. And here it is, a rare blue sky. You might think, why am I up by the castle taking a photograph? Why am I not looking for fossils? Well, the problem is, it's high tide. The waves are lapping up against the beach. But when the tide goes down, that beach turns into a rock platform, Jurassic rock, that juts out into the water. And we went there because a geologist friend of ours had found a tiny little bone, and that got us excited. We were on the scent, the trail of dinosaurs. So we went there, we were very hopeful. We spent all day looking for bones, and we didn't find anything. It was one of those days. And in fact, there's a lot of those days when you do field work. You don't just go out and find a new dinosaur every time you go and look. You got to be patient, you got to be persistent. But this was a frustrating day. And so we packed up for the evening. We started to walk back to our cars, and we started just to look at these tide pools, these little rock pools, full of algae and seaweed and limpets and barnacles and all the normal stuff of the Scottish seaside. But the more we looked at these, we thought, this is kind of weird. There's actually hundreds of these things on the rock platform. And they're all pretty much the same size and shape. And there seemed to be a pattern to them, a bit of a left-right zigzagging pattern. Now, some of them we could see from the side, and we could see that they were actually impressed into the rock. So this couldn't just be random erosion from the tide. Something was impressing into the soft sand or mud before it turned to rock. Some of the holes were filled with the harder rock that stood out as a cast, and you could see details. You could see little bits sticking out. 1, 2, 3, 4, you can see at the top of that one. Some of them were paired together. There was a bigger horseshoe-shaped one and a smaller crescent-shaped one in front. And they were genuinely big. These things were big. Each one was about the size of a car tire. And after a few minutes, it dawned on us that, wait a minute, this was actually a really good day, a really successful day. We had found fossils, just not bones and skeletons like we were hoping. We had found more footprints and handprints, but so much bigger than those ones in Poland because we're now in the Jurassic period and dinosaurs are much larger. But there's really only one type of dinosaur, one type of animal that's ever lived on land in the entire history of the Earth that was so big that every time its hand or foot touched the ground, it left a hole the size of a car tire. And I'm talking about the sauropod dinosaurs, the ones with the long necks and the big bellies and the arms and legs that look like Greek columns. These were the animals that included things like Brontosaurus, Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, so many famous dinosaurs. Later on, in the Cretaceous period, some of them would become heavier than Boeing 737 airplanes, the biggest things that have ever lived on land. The ones making their footprints and handprints in ancient Scotland 170 million years ago in the Jurassic period were merely the size of about 3 elephants put together. But they were, at that time, some of the biggest things that had ever lived on Earth. Now, the more we look on Skye, the more fossil footprints and handprints we find. And my student Paige, who, like me, is American and then moved over to Scotland, Paige has a background in geology, also a background in engineering, so she's used her skills to really study these tracks in incredible detail, using drones, using other bespoke photographic rigs that she's developed to make really high-resolution maps of all of these different track sites we are starting to find. And what these maps tell us is that we actually have a lot of different dinosaurs making tracks. There's lots of different types of tracks. It's not just the sauropods. We have tracks that were made by stegosaurs with plates on their backs. We have tracks that were made by early duck-billed dinosaurs. And a lot of these dinosaurs were making their footprints on the beaches or in the lagoons. They were living near the coastline back in the Jurassic when Scotland, I kid you not, was a subtropical island paradise. It's not like that today. Now there's, in this scene of ancient Scotland from the Jurassic, there's another dinosaur you can see in the foreground that we also have footprints of, but only footprints, never handprints, because these were dinosaurs that only walked on their hind legs. These are theropod dinosaurs, the meat-eating dinosaurs, and these things were actually very early cousins and ancestors of TRex. Now in Scotland, we only have some footprints and a few bones, but there are some better fossils from other parts of the world of these dinosaurs that show that these things actually were members of the Tyrannosaur lineage, the Tyrannosaur family. And the best of these are fossils like this from China. This is called Guanlong. It lived roughly at the same time as the dinosaurs of Skye. It was only about the size of a human. And it was a tyrannosaur. It was one of the earliest members of the Tyrannosaur family, which might strike you as odd. Of course, we know TRex later on, which lived about 100 million years later, was absolutely enormous, the biggest, baddest thing that's ever lived. So somehow, these dinosaurs had to go from being small to being really big over time. And how they did so has long been a mystery. But we have some new evidence that helps us understand it. It's a new fossil that comes from Uzbekistan, another example of how dinosaurs are being found all over the world these days. And it's an intermediate tyrannosaur. That's what's important. It's a new species. We called it Timurlengia, and it's intermediate in size and age between those first Jurassic human-sized tyrannosaurs and the last bus-sized ones that lived in the latest Cretaceous. So Timurlengia is about the size of a horse, and it lived earlier in the Cretaceous. So what you're looking at here is the back of its head, the back of its skull. That big hole is where the spinal cord would go into the brain cavity. Now we could do something interesting with the Timurlengia skull. We put it in a CAT scanner and use the x-rays of the CAT scanner to see inside of it, just like a medical doctor might do for us. And that allows us to build a digital model of the stuff inside the skull, the brain, the ears, the sinuses, the nerves, the blood vessels. And that gives some very interesting insight into Tyrannosaur evolution, because what you're looking at here in the lower right of the screen, that blue bit is the back end of this dinosaur's brain. The pink bit that looks kind of like a pretzel, that's the inner ear. And there's a couple of things that are really important here. The first is that that brain is really big for a horse-sized reptile. This was a smart animal. And secondly, the ear, the bit sticking down from the pretzel, that's the cochlea, that's the bit of the ear that actually hears sound. It's very long. And we know from modern animals that the longer the cochlea is, the greater the range of sounds they can hear. What this means is that these tyrannosaurs were becoming smarter and they were developing keener senses while they were still relatively small, long before they became giant. And those keen senses and intelligence may have helped tyrannosaurs survive when some other meat-eating dinosaurs like the allosaurs and the spinosaurs went extinct in the middle to late part of the Cretaceous. And when those other meat-eaters went extinct, that opened up a new job at the top of the food chain, and tyrannosaurs moved in and they became apex predators. And it was only at the very end of the age of dinosaurs that tyrannosaurs ballooned in size and became the bus-sized monsters like T-Rex that we all know and love. And really, T-Rex is worthy, I think, of all the hyperbole. This was an animal that was the size of a bus. It weighed 7 or 8 tons as an adult. It had a head the size of a bathtub. I could fit inside its jaws. It crushed the bones of its prey. What an incredible feat of evolution. But what made T-Rex really special is not just that it was really big or had sharp teeth or powerful jaws. It's that it had both brawn and brains. It inherited the big brains and keen senses of its smaller ancestors. That's what made it the ultimate dinosaur predator. Brain and brawn. Now, as tyrannosaurs were getting bigger, there was another group of dinosaurs that was doing the opposite. They were getting smaller over time, and these were pretty closely related dinosaurs. These were other theropods, other meat eaters, and these were the raptor dinosaurs. And this here is the real velociraptor. Don't believe what you see in the films. In the new Jurassic World film, there's a new raptor called Pyroraptor that's in there. That's much more like what a real raptor would have looked like. Because real raptors, most of them were actually quite small. The real velociraptor was only about the size of a miniature poodle. And real raptors had feathers, and some of them even had wings on their arms. And this is not just guesswork. This isn't just a hallucination of a mad artist. This is reality. We have real fossils that tell us that dinosaurs, many of them had feathers. And these fossils come from northeastern China, from a place called Liaoning Province, this land of factories and rolling hills and a lot of farmland. And it was in the mid-90s, just a few years after Jurassic Park came out, that farmers working their land started to find these amazing fossils, pristine skeletons of dinosaurs, not only the bones, but many of them preserving fine details of the skin and of the feathers. These dinosaurs had the misfortune of being buried by volcanic eruptions, kind of like Pompeii being buried when Mount Vesuvius erupted. And it was that burial by these volcanoes that locked in these fossils, preserved them so well. These fossils really sealed the deal. They proved this idea that went back to the time of Darwin that today's birds evolved from dinosaurs. They were the final bit of evidence really needed. Dinosaurs had feathers, come on. In addition to all the other evidence that piled up over time, dinosaurs were the ancestors of birds. But more than that, these Chinese feathered dinosaurs tell us how birds, how feathers, how flying evolved. And the first thing they tell us is that a lot of dinosaurs had feathers. Feathers were a normal thing for dinosaurs. Now, I've been really privileged to be able to study a lot of these feathered dinosaur fossils in different museums in China with amazing colleagues in China. And it is a thrill to see these fossils brought in by farmers. And so many of them have feathers. There are meat eaters that have feathers, plant eaters that have feathers. There are little dinosaurs that have feathers. There is even a tyrannosaur from China that is like 8 or 9 meters long that would have weighed like a ton in mass. It is covered in feathers. feathers are a normal dinosaur thing. And if you map it on the family tree of dinosaurs, the conclusion to me is really inescapable. The common ancestor of all dinosaurs was probably a feathered animal. And feathers were to dinosaurs what hair is to mammals, something normal. But that's not to say that all dinosaurs looked like birds, that dinosaurs all had wings, and they could all fly. Of course, the Brontosaurus couldn't fly. The feathers that most dinosaurs had were feathers like these. These are some tailbones of a tyrannosaur from China. These things above them that look like scratches in the rocks, those are feathers, but they are simple feathers. They're individual little strands that look like hair. And it's those types of feathers that are common among dinosaurs. Most dinosaurs had these simple feathers. Now, that means these dinosaurs couldn't fly with those feathers any more than we can fly with our hair. So these feathers must have evolved for another reason. And probably they evolved for the same reason hair evolved in mammals, to help keep the body warm and to regulate the body temperature. That's how most dinosaurs kept their feathers, but one group started to do something peculiar, and these were the raptors and their close relatives. As their bodies got smaller and smaller, they packed those feathers ever more densely across their bodies. They started to line up feathers on the arms, and those feathers got longer, and those feathers started to branch out. They turned from simple, single little hairy strands into brushes, and those brushes flattened out until some of these animals developed full-on wings made of quill pen feathers. And that's what you see here. Look at this arm. There's the forearm, there's the hand. Look at all these feathers attaching to it. This is a wing, just like the wings of a modern bird. But this is not a bird. This is a raptor dinosaur. It is this raptor dinosaur, what I had the great privilege of being invited to help study and name a few years ago. A raptor that we call Zhenwanlong, a new species, a close cousin of Velociraptor. Feathers all over its body, feathers on its tail, feathers on its back, and there's those wings on each arm. But this raptor was about the size of a pretty big dog, and those wings simply were not big enough to keep an animal its size in the air. And in fact, the first evidence of wings, as far as their oldest, record, are some fossils from Alberta of ornithomimosaur dinosaurs that Darla Zeleniski and her colleagues have described. Those dinosaurs were about the size of horses. Their wings were probably about the size of a laptop screen. No way those wings could be used for flying. So wings must have developed for something else too, and we think that wings probably evolved as advertising billboards sticking off of the arms of these dinosaurs to attract mates, to intimidate rivals. And some of the evidence for that is we can tell the colors of these feathers from the melanosomes, these little bubbles of pigment that are preserved inside. And we can tell that these dinosaurs had all kinds of flamboyant colors and patterns. So probably wings evolved as advertising billboards, and the fact is that these raptor dinosaurs, their wings just weren't big enough to keep them in the air. And that's why we don't call them birds. We basically use the word bird to refer to those dinosaurs that could functionally fly by flapping their wings. Now, if you saw a Zhenwanlong alive, it would have probably looked something like this, and I think you would have just considered it some type of weird bird. A ferocious bird, I mean, look at those claws, look at the sharp teeth, but really is it any weirder than a turkey or an ostrich or an emu? Probably not. But again, we don't call it a bird because it couldn't flap its wings to keep itself in the air. But you can imagine, with just a little bit of tinkering with these raptors, their bodies get a little bit smaller. Those wings become even bigger to advertise even more successfully to mates or to scare off rivals even better. And then at some point, a threshold is crossed. And by the simple laws of physics, those wings, those advertising billboards, would now be big enough that when that dinosaur moved them around, they could actually provide a little bit of lift, a little bit of thrust, and that dinosaur could start playing around in the air. And from that point on, flight was born, basically accidentally. But that's how dinosaurs started to fly and became birds, by repurposing those feathers that were evolved for other reasons, and even the wings that were evolved for other reasons initially. Now, I know it's a weird thing to think about, And there are still people that argue with me. Okay, maybe birds evolved from dinosaurs, but we shouldn't call them dinosaurs. They're so different from a T-Rex or a Brontosaurus. But I always show a picture like this to people that make that argument. I say, what is this? What is it? Well, it's a bat. Of course it's a bat. What is a bat? Well, a bat is a type of mammal, obviously. It has hair, it feeds its babies milk, it has molar teeth, it has all the things that mammals have. That's because it is part of the mammal family tree. It evolved from other mammals. But bats are just a strange type of mammal that got small, evolved wings, and developed the ability to fly. Birds are the dinosaur equivalent of that. They're just a strange type of dinosaur that got small, evolved wings, and developed the ability to fly. The difference, of course, is that birds are the only dinosaurs that have remained to the present day. So you could imagine some alternative world where bats are the only mammals that survived some catastrophe. But of course, mammals would still survive. They're still there as bats. So that's how we should think of birds. The last, but a quite great remnant of the dinosaur empire. Because there are over 14,000 species of birds in today's world. That's more than double the number of mammal species, by the way. So in many ways, dinosaurs continue to reign. And some birds we know well, majestic animals like our American bald eagle. Others not so much. Others annoy us to no end. These jerks, these gulls, these are a pest here in Edinburgh. We're so close to the ocean. These things are around all the time. And they're no fun when you're at the beach. You're trying to eat some ice cream, eat some chips. But I think in that moment, when one of these gulls comes down and tries to dive bomb you and steals your french fries, I think in that moment, in the nastiness, the cunningness, the ferocity, you can sense the inner velociraptor in that seagull. And that's not just a turn of phrase. Velociraptor was one of the very closest cousins of birds. So dinosaurs do live on today, but only in the form of birds. All the other dinosaurs, the big meat eaters, the ones with long necks, the ones with horns and duckbills, all those famous dinosaurs died out at the end of the Cretaceous period, 66 million years ago, at a time when the world was starting to look more modern. The continents had been moving around. Sea levels were much higher, so a lot of North America and Europe were covered by seas. But by and large, you can see the modern map emerging. And it was in this world where now there's separate continents. There's different dinosaur species living on every continent. It was this world that was rudely interrupted one Friday morning, let's say, 66 million years ago, when this 10-kilometer wide rock, a rock the size of Mount Everest, was hurtling through the heavens and it fell out of the sky. It could have gone anywhere. It was a piece of space junk. But it happened to make a beeline for the Earth, and it was traveling faster, like 10 times faster than a speeding bullet, and it smashed into what is now Mexico. And in doing so, it released over 1 billion nuclear bombs worth of energy. And it punched a hole in the Earth's crust over 150 kilometers wide, leaving a crater. This was a terrible, terrible day to be alive. This was no normal asteroid. This is probably the biggest asteroid that's hit Earth over the last 500 million years. And it just so happened that dinosaurs were right in the way. And there were plenty of dinosaurs that were there that witnessed the asteroid. T-Rex was alive and doing well when the asteroid hit. So was Triceratops. So were duck-billed dinosaurs like Edmontosaurus. When that asteroid hit, it unleashed chaos. Wildfires, tsunamis, earthquakes, all the dust blocked out the sun. The Earth went dark and cold for a few years, maybe even up to a decade. It was a global nuclear winter. Plants didn't have sunlight to photosynthesize. The forests collapsed. Plant eaters didn't have food to eat. They died. The meat eaters didn't have food to eat. They died. The ecosystems collapsed like houses of cards. And it was such a sudden change from the world dinosaurs were so well adapted to that all the dinosaurs, except for birds, it seems like they just couldn't cope with it. And luck would have played a role, surely, but simply the dinosaurs were so well adapted to the world that existed before the asteroid that they couldn't deal with the change so well. Now, 75% of species died when that asteroid hit. It wasn't just dinosaurs. The marine reptiles, the pterodactyls, the ammonites in the ocean, all kinds of plankton. So many things died out as well. It was a mass extinction, but there were some survivors. And the more I study dinosaurs, the more I become interested in what happened after the asteroid. After all, the asteroid was a gut punch to the Earth. But once that punch was over, the Earth could start to recover, and the Earth recovered pretty quickly. And those species that did survive now had a largely open world to colonize. And I've spent a lot of time in New Mexico looking for fossils. This is one of the best places in the world to find fossils of the last surviving dinosaurs, other than birds, and the animals that then took over from dinosaurs in the next interval of time, which is called the Paleocene. Now I bring my students to New Mexico. This is Sarah. She was my very first PhD student in Edinburgh. She's now become one of the world's experts on those mammals that survive, these animals that survived the extinction, many of which were mammals. And this is Tom Williamson here, my dear friend who I've worked with for many years. He is one of the world's experts on these mammals and the birds that happened to make it through that darkest hour of the asteroid, emerge on the other side, and find this new world to conquer. Now, when we work in New Mexico, if we're looking in the Cretaceous rocks, it's kind of like being in parts of Alberta. There's dinosaur bones everywhere. You can't step without stomping on a piece of broken dinosaur bone. But then you walk up those Cretaceous rocks, you reach a barren interval. The asteroids hit. And then soon after, those dinosaur bones are gone. You never see another single bone or tooth, but you do start to see a lot of fossils like these. The teeth and the jaws and the skulls and the skeletons of mammals. Things that we recognize because those teeth are pretty similar to our teeth. Now, the more we study the mammals, the more we see that the mammals almost went the way of the dinosaurs. When the asteroid hit, maybe 9 out of every 10 mammal species that were there living with the dinosaurs died when the asteroid hit, but some survived. Probably because they were small, they were adaptable, they could hide in burrows, they could eat a whole variety of foods. They were resilient. And thankfully they were, because among those survivors were ancestors of ours, direct ancestors of ours that stared down the asteroid and made it through to form a new world. And not too long after the extinction, we see this huge diversification of mammals. Now, mammals had lived with dinosaurs for over 150 million years, but during that time, they never got bigger than a house cat. Within 200,000 years of the asteroid in New Mexico, we have fossils of mammals the size of pigs. Within 1 million years, mammals the size of cows. They got bigger and bigger, filling many of those ecological niches that the dinosaurs vacated. But not all mammals got big. Some were still pretty small, and among those are fossils of this mammal that turn up in New Mexico not too long after the extinction. It's an animal no bigger than a house cat, long gangly arms and legs, long fingers and toes for gripping tree branches. What you're looking at here is one of the very oldest primates, basically a distant ancestor of ours. And these types of animals, they only got their opportunity in this new world after the dinosaurs died. And that shows that our own evolutionary story is intimately tied to that of the dinosaurs. Now, I could say a lot more about mammals, and maybe I will one day, but I'll just say I wrote a pop science book about mammals last year, and I tell the whole story there. So you might be interested in following that up. But I will leave it there with this idea that our own evolution is so linked to that of the dinosaurs. Now, I know this was a very, blitzkrieg kind of drive through dinosaur evolution, hundreds of millions of years in 45 minutes. I cover things very briefly. Some of you may have questions. I'm very happy to take questions in the 10, 15 minutes we have before I start my Friday night family time. So thank you very much again for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to any questions you have. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for such an amazing talk. There's so many things to talk about in the fossil record. And of course, dinosaurs are some of the most popular. Dinosaurs and what came after them. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat here. Oh, yeah, there's a lot of people that think the meteor might have hit on a Monday instead of a Friday.
Yeah, probably, right? Figures.
I also know a number of Canada geese that have channeled their inner velociraptor as well. So it's not just seals.
Yep, those geese can be we were just visiting our family in America, and like, yeah, there's overrun with those geese, and they hiss at you, they dart their heads at you. You know, they don't have teeth. You know, evolution has lost their teeth, but ooh, you can tell they want to treat you like a velociraptor would have treated a protoceratops, you know, back in the Cretaceous.
Yeah, exactly. So those are definitely related to Tyrannosaurs for sure. There is a question about why we don't see badland topographies all over Alberta where there are rivers. And I guess that could apply to anywhere.
I don't, you know, my knowledge of Alberta is very limited. I must say I love visiting because it is, you know, dinosaur heaven. I don't really know. I mean, these badlands, they happen because you have rivers eroding through soft rocks, usually sandstones and mudstones, and that erosion's all been very recent. This is all kind of post-ice age erosion. So these rivers are cutting down through the soft rock pretty quickly. So I suppose you need to have rivers of a certain size and flow and rock that is soft enough. I don't know. Many people here listening probably know better than me. I grew up in the middle of America where everything's flat for, you know, thousands of miles. So I don't know. But that's my understanding of how you get badlands.
Mm-hmm. I actually do have a question about the Isle of Skye sauropod footprints. So we have a similar footprint site actually just over the border in British Columbia,
Okay.
but there are no body fossils. Like there's no body fossils of sauropods anywhere in Canada. So is it a characteristic of sauropod footprints that you get the sauropods and not their bodies?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we have a few bones of sauropods from the Isle of Skye, but it's very limited. You know, nobody's ever found anything even close to a good skeleton. There's like a limb bone here, a vertebra there, mostly from these sandstones and conglomerates that were formed by rivers. So these are probably bones, you know, that are basically moving through the rivers in log jams and stuff. It's probably a matter of depositional environments, the sort of environments where you get footprints. You think of the kind of geological miracle you need to encase a footprint in stone. A footprint is usually so ephemeral. You know, if you walk on a beach, that your tracks are going to be washed away usually by the next wave. So to get footprints preserved as fossils is probably a 1 in a trillion kind of thing where that surface you walk on has to get hard and then get covered quickly by something else. And those kind of environments maybe just are not as conducive to preserving big skeletons, which are maybe more found, you know, not always, but in many cases in river channels and overbanks of rivers and so on. So my inclination is that it's just the style of preserving a footprint versus a skeleton is just so different that it's hard to find both in the same place. But there are some places where you do find both.
Yeah. You think they'd be so big that, you know, they'd obviously turn into fossils.
I know.
They don't.
Yeah.
So there's another question here. Given a new dinosaur is being discovered every week, how many more Tyrannosaur species do you think are still out there to be found? Is there a way to estimate?
Well, it's hard to estimate what remains to be found because until you find it, you don't really know it's there. I mean, there are ways to model these things. There have been some paleontologists that are basically statistics gurus that have tried to estimate, the population sizes of T-Rex and how long T-Rex would have lived, over evolutionary time, and how many individuals there would have been at one time, and so on. Those mathematical and statistical estimations, they're tricky. The uncertainty on those things is so big. I would think you could do something similar for predicting the total number of species of a group, but I, wouldn't have much faith in the results. So all I would say is just people continue to find new tyrannosaurs. Almost every year now there's some new Tyrannosaur species, even from areas that are pretty well sampled, from Alberta, from the Dakotas or Montana in America, places that have yielded a lot of Tyrannosaurs before, still yield entirely new species. If some new, layer or unit of rock is sampled well for the first time or whatever. So there's probably a lot more to be found. We know they lived across North America and Asia in the latest Cretaceous, the really big ones. We also know that the smaller, more primitive tyrannosaurs earlier on in the Cretaceous and in the Jurassic lived across North America, Europe, and Asia. So they lived for a long time. They lived across a broad area. There's probably tons of them that still remain to be discovered.
I also have a question about kind of relates to something more that you had in the rise and fall of the dinosaurs. The transition, and I think you touched on it, the transition between the carcharodontids kind of in the earlier Cretaceous and the Tyrannosaurs later in the Cretaceous, is there kind of an ecological reason why that transition happened? Do we know of one? I think there's a gap there, isn't there?
There is, yeah. So, the Tyrannosaurs only became really big and they only became apex predators at the very end of the Cretaceous. There may have been one or two random Tyrannosaurs here and there in the Jurassic or early Cretaceous. So then in their own local ecosystems may have been the biggest predator. But by and large, as a group, they didn't move into that apex predator role until the final 15 or 20 million years at most of the Cretaceous. So for a long time, they were smaller, much smaller, human size, horse size, and they were living in the shadows of other giant dinosaurs. There were other meat eaters that were at the top of the food chain: allosaurs, carcharodontosaurs, spinosaurs, ceratosaurs, all kinds of different groups over time. And what seems to have happened is that there was a transition between faunas in the middle Cretaceous, that before then, in North America and Asia, it was carcharodontosaurs that were the top predators. They're also known, of course, quite a lot of them from the southern continents too, these carcharodontosaurs. But they seem to have mostly, if not entirely, gone extinct sometime in the middle Cretaceous and were replaced in essence by tyrannosaurs at the top of the food chain. We don't know why, because the fossil record of the middle Cretaceous is still very poor, but there were some big changes in climate and environment during that time. Seemingly some big episodes of global warming that just haven't left a great record in the geological and fossil records. Probably something happened there to the big meat eaters at the top of the food chain, linked in some way to that climate and environmental change. And the smaller tyrannosaurs that were living in the shadows at that time were able to endure, maybe because of their intelligence and keen senses. And then once that climate and environmental change died down, there was this opening at the top of the food chain and tyrannosaurs could move in. That's probably more or less what happened. I know that's a nice story. We just don't have tons of fossils to untangle what exactly was happening in the middle Cretaceous. So this to me is another of these big mysteries about dinosaurs that remains to be solved. What's happening in the middle Cretaceous? And it will take the discovery of new fossil sites from that time. That's what we really need. And so people just have to keep looking, and who knows what's out there to be found.
For sure. Oh, here's a question. Tyrannosaurus, lips or no lips?
Well, this is timely, isn't it? I mean, of course, yesterday, as many of you probably would have seen, this Canadian paper, Thomas Cullen, Kirsten Brink, who's, not too far from you. Well, of course, she is quite far because all the distances are very far in Canada. But Dave Evans and that crew, published this paper in Science to great fanfare. I can't tell you how many journalists were sending emails, getting in touch to want commentary on the Tyrannosaur lips. It was awesome to see that study make such an impact. And I think it's just super cool. It's like face to face with the biggest, baddest dinosaur of all time, imagining what it actually looked like. And they argue that the depiction that we see oftentimes in films and in art of tyrannosaurs with these toothy, bare-toothed grins where these giant teeth are hanging out of their mouth, all sinister, that they probably wouldn't have looked like that in real life. They would have had a lot of soft tissues covering those teeth like we do, and tissues that you could call lips. I mean, they wouldn't be lips like our lips. They wouldn't be pouty, fleshy things like mammal lips, but keratin and scales and muscles and other kind of soft tissue coming down. I think, there's a debate back and forth about this. There are people that argue, equally passionately that no, tyrannosaurs bared their teeth more like crocodiles. You look at a crocodile, they don't have a lot of gums or lips or soft tissue. The teeth are just kind of there. So did they look more like a crocodile? Did they look more like what this new paper is arguing? I'm a little bit on the fence. It's also not really my specialty to be on. I'm not a great expert on soft tissues, but I think that the paper in Science makes the strongest case yet for lips. I think also the only thing that's going to solve it once and for all is the discovery of a TRex mummy, where you get the soft tissues. And it sounds crazy, but there's duck-billed dinosaur mummies from the same time interval. Like, it can happen if a fossil is preserved in the right way. So I think that's going to be it. Also, I predict that's when the first T-Rex feathers will be found as well, if we get a mummy. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Actually, a question that leads right into that. So been trying to understand the latest T-Rex reconstructions. Some say they're feathery, some say patchy, movies say scaly. Is there a pattern to how feathery T-Rexes should look?
What we know is this. We know that that most dinosaurs had feathers because in a place like China, where you get the conditions right to preserve feathers, remember, these are soft tissues, they decay quickly. They're not going to normally be preserved in the same way a hard part like a bone or a shell will be preserved. But in those places where you get that spectacular preservation, all kinds of dinosaurs have feathers. Again, meat eaters, plant eaters, little ones, big ones. So if you map that on the family tree, it's really inescapable. The common ancestor of dinosaurs had feathers. And not only that, but there's pterosaurs, which are kind of the next step out on the family tree. They had feathery structures too. They didn't make their wings out of feathers, but they had feathery, fluffy bits. So really it seems like feathers, simple feathers, the ones that were just fluffy little hairy things, go way back, and all dinosaurs, at least ancestrally, have them. We know that tyrannosaurs did have feathers. There's two tyrannosaurs from China, Dilong and U. tyrannus. Dilong's the size of a dog. U. tyrannus is like the size of a big car or a jeep. They both have feathers. So we know the tyrannosaur group itself had feathers. So the ancestors of T-Rex undoubtedly had feathers. Now that doesn't mean T-Rex itself had feathers. Animals can lose things. You know, you look at an elephant and it's lost most of the hair of its ancestors, but there's still a little bit there. My guess, my best guess, is that T-Rex would have had some feathers. Its ancestors had them. So it would have probably had something. Would it have had feathers all over its body? Would it have looked like Big Bird? Probably not. It was probably too big. It probably would have overheated if it had those kind of feathers. But it probably had feathers somewhere, just like all mammals today. Even dolphins and whales have some hair at some point in their lifestyle.
Yep, and just one kind of more follow-up question about that. Do you think we'll ever find a Tyrannosaur mummy? I know we hope to find one.
Well, get on it. Put it on the to-do list. This is what we were on Twitter, yesterday talking about the new lips by Clint Boyd, some of you know, who's studied some of the hadrosaur mummies in North Dakota, just south of the border, for you guys in the prairies. He said, this is next on my to-do list. I'm going to find it. I do think somebody will find one eventually because, again, there's other dinosaurs that lived in those same environments that have been found as mummies, in terms of their body somehow desiccated and dried out, and that preserved a lot of the skin and soft tissue. So if it can happen to a hadrosaur, it can certainly happen to a tyrannosaur. It's just a matter of finding it, and I do think it will happen at some point. But you just have to wait for that fossil to come out of the rocks, and that means more people looking, and who knows when it's going to be found.
Yeah, for sure. We do actually find mummified dinosaurs up here in northern Alberta, so we have a Tyrannosaur on our list, our to-do list,
good,
to find list.
Good. That, and it will happen. So I hope it's you guys.
So I think one more question.
Okay. We'll end with this and then, family time.
Yep, for sure. I've noticed that Gestrelia is now included with T-Rex skeletal reconstructions. Were Gestrelia common in other theropods?
Yes, they were, not universally. There's some studies that have been done on this. There's a guy named Leon Claessens, who some of you may know, who's a paleontologist, who's actually written papers on Gestrelia in dinosaurs. And it's the same in other reptiles too. They're there in some species, they're not in others. They anchored some important muscles that help in body support and in breathing and so on. So there are some dinosaurs that had them, some that didn't. In some of these really well preserved, like raptor dinosaurs from China, the feathered dinosaurs, you do see really good gastral baskets, and others you don't. So it's pretty variable, but it's not super unusual or anything like that. All right, well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to start my family time now, get down to my little 3-year-old, but thanks again for the invite and for doing this early, and good luck finding that Tyrannosaur mummy. Emily, good to see you. Jackson, thanks again for everything, and until we all cross paths again.
Yep, and thank you so much for being our guest this month. It's been super awesome.
Well, thank you. All right, have a good weekend, everybody.